The first thing Gia noticed was the sound. Not music, not laughter, not the soft hum of celebration drifting through the wedding hall. Scissors, metal biting through curls. Snip. Her breath caught so hard her chest burned. "Stop," Gia whispered, hands shaking as she reached for her head. Another lock fell. Dark curls scattered across the pale tile like pieces of something that had been taken without permission. "No," she said louder now, panic breaking through her throat. "Please, stop." Her stepmother stood behind her. Laura's hand was steady. Too steady. The mirror in front of them reflected everything Gia didn't want to see. Her own wide eyes. Her mouth trembling. And Laura's face, tight, controlled, almost relieved. "You will not steal attention from my daughter today," Laura said flatly. The words landed heavier than the scissors. Gia stared at her reflection, not fully understanding what she was hearing, only knowing it hurt in a place deeper than her scalp. "I wasn't trying to," Gia said. "I swear I wasn't." Another snip. The sound echoed in the small prep room. "I told you," Laura continued, voice low, sharp. That hair was too much, too big, too loud. Gia's knees weakened. She grabbed the counter to steady herself as tears blurred the mirror. "This is Danny's wedding," Gia said, breath-breaking. "I just wanted to stand beside her." Laura leaned closer, her reflection filling the glass. "And you would have," she replied, "if you knew how to stay in your place." Gia gasped. Her hand flew to the uneven edge of her hair, fingers trembling as they brushed over what was missing. The curls she had spent years protecting. The curls her father used to call her crown. The curls her sister begged her to wear proudly today. Gone, or worse, taken. "I trusted you," Gia whispered. Laura's lips pressed into a thin line. "That was your mistake." The door was locked. Gia turned toward it instinctively, panic rising fast now. "Open the door," she said. "Please. Someone will notice I'm gone. No one is looking for you," Laura replied. That sentence hurt more than the scissors. Gia slid down against the counter, her back hitting the cabinet as the weight of the moment crashed into her all at once. The wedding outside continued. Music swelled. Guests laughed. Glasses clinked. Inside the prep room, Gia cried silently, her hands pressed against her mouth as more curls lay scattered at her feet. Her chest tightened. Her ears rang. She felt small in a way she hadn't felt since she was a child, standing in doorways, listening to comments that pretended to be advice but felt like warnings. "Why are you doing this?" Gia asked through tears. "What did I do to you?" Laura exhaled sharply. "You exist too loudly," she said. "And today isn't about you." The scissors lifted again. Gia flinched. "Stop," she cried, finally raising her voice. "Please." Laura hesitated for half a second, not because she felt sorry, because she heard something. Footsteps. Gia froze. So did Laura. The handle rattled. A voice came from the other side of the door, low, calm, unfamiliar. "Open the door." Laura's hand tightened around the scissors. "No," she muttered. The handle rattled again, harder this time. "I said, open the door," the voice repeated. Something about the tone made the room feel smaller. Gia looked up, tears streaming down her face, hope and fear colliding in her chest. Laura stepped back instinctively, her confidence slipping for the first time. The lock clicked, the door swung open, and everything changed. Gia didn't know who stood on the other side of that door yet. All she knew was that her hands wouldn't stop shaking. Her chest rose and fell too fast, like her body was trying to outrun the moment, even while trapped inside it. Tears slid down her cheeks unchecked, not dramatic, not loud, just the quiet kind that come when you realize something important has been taken and can't be put back the same way. If you've ever been humiliated by someone who was supposed to protect you, then you know that feeling. That hollow drop in your stomach. That moment when your mind keeps asking, why them? Why like this? Gia had asked herself that question more times than she could count. Have you ever been told you were too much just for existing? Too visible? too confident, too different. Not because you were doing anything wrong, but because your presence made someone else uncomfortable. Gia grew up learning how to shrink without disappearing. She learned it early, at family gatherings, where compliments came with conditions. At dinner tables, where silence felt safer than correction. In a house where love came with instructions. Tone it down. Don't draw attention. You don't want people talking. Words that sounded gentle, words that landed hard. And still, she stayed. Because when her mother passed, she promised herself one thing: she would not abandon the people she loved, even if loving them meant swallowing pieces of herself. Especially Danny, her little sister, the one person in that house who never asked her to soften, straighten, or silence anything. The one who looked at her hair and saw beauty instead of threat. That was why today mattered. Not the wedding itself, not the photos, not the guests, but standing beside Danny, showing up whole. And now, inside this locked room, Gia wondered how something meant to celebrate. Love had turned into a reminder of everything she was told she shouldn't be. Her fingers trembled as she touched the uneven edges of her hair again. It wasn't vanity, it was violation. For many people, hair is just hair. But for black women, hair carries memory. It carries history. It carries mornings spent learning how to care for yourself when the world insists you shouldn't exist as you are. Gia remembered her father sitting behind her as a little girl, trying to help her part her curls, even though his hands weren't gentle yet. "You don't have to change this," he'd said. "The world will try. You don't." That memory burned now, because he wasn't here. And the person who replaced him in the house had made it clear she never wanted Gia to feel secure there. If you've ever been betrayed by family, you understand the confusion. The way your heart argues with itself. Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe they didn't mean it that way. Maybe I should have known better. Gia had made excuses for Laura for years. She's just traditional. She means well. She's under stress. Until stress turned into control. And control turned into cruelty. And cruelty found scissors. The worst part wasn't the pain. It was the silence outside that door. Music continued. Laughter floated in. The world kept moving. And in that moment, Gia felt invisible in a room full of people who loved her, because the one person who didn't had found a way to isolate her anyway. That's how shame works. It doesn't need an audience. It just needs authority. Have you ever looked around and realized someone was hurting you because they were afraid of how easily you took up space? Because your joy didn't require permission? Because you reminded them of something they lost or never had? Gia wiped her face with the sleeve of her dress, smearing makeup she had been excited to wear just hours ago. She didn't feel beautiful anymore. She felt exposed, small, ashamed for crying even though she knew she shouldn't be. That's another trick humiliation plays. It makes you feel guilty for reacting to harm. Her mind raced. What will people say? How will I walk back in there? What will Danny think when she sees me like this? She closed her eyes, breathing through the ache in her throat. All she wanted in that moment was for someone to see her. Not the mess. Not the damage. But her. Someone to look at the situation and say, without hesitation, this is wrong. She didn't know yet that help was already on the other side of that door. She didn't know yet that the next few seconds would redraw the shape of this day and her life. She only knew one thing. Whatever happened next would decide whether she left this room broken or finally defended. The handle turned again. Harder this time. Laura's shoulders stiffened. Her grip on the scissors tightened, knuckles whitening as if she could still control the moment by force alone. "I told you to wait," she snapped toward the door. There was no answer, just a pause. Then, the door opened. Not slowly, not carefully. It swung wide with a sharp sound that sliced through the room and the tension holding it together. A man stood in the doorway, tall, still, composed. His presence filled the space instantly, not because he raised his voice, but because he didn't need to. His eyes went first to the floor, the curls scattered across the tile, then to Gia. curled against the cabinet. Dress wrinkled, face wet with tears. Hands clutching her hair like she was trying to hold on to something already taken. Then, his gaze lifted and locked onto Laura. "Step away from her," he said. Not shouted, not threatened, just stated. The room went quiet in a way that felt final. Laura laughed nervously, shifting her weight. "This is a family matter. You shouldn't be in here." The man didn't move. His voice stayed calm, but something firm settled beneath it. "Put the scissors down." Gia felt it before she understood it. Safety, not sympathy, not chaos. Safety. Laura tried again. "She asked me to fix her hair. It got a little emotional." "No," the man interrupted. One word. Enough to end the lie. He stepped fully into the room now, closing the door behind him with deliberate control, cutting off the noise from the reception like a curtain falling. His eyes never left Laura. "That isn't what happened." Laura's mouth opened, then closed. For the first time since Gia had known her, she looked unsure. "Who are you?" Laura demanded. The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked past her, not brushing her, not acknowledging her presence. Straight to Gia, he crouched slightly in front of her, careful not to crowd her space. "Are you hurt?" he asked. The question was quiet, gentle. Gia tried to speak. Nothing came out. Her throat tightened as another wave of tears fell, but this time they weren't just fear. They were release. He nodded once, as if her silence was enough of an answer. Without touching her yet, he reached behind him and removed his suit jacket. He draped it around her shoulders slowly, shielding her from the room, from the cold, from Laura's eyes. "You're safe," he said. The words settled in her chest like something she hadn't realized she'd been waiting to hear. "Safe." Laura scoffed. "This is ridiculous. She's being dramatic." The man stood, slowly, and when he turned back to Laura, the air shifted. "I will not warn you again," he said. "Step away." Something in his tone made it clear this wasn't about volume. It was about authority. Laura glanced at the scissors in her hand, then at him. For half a second, Gia wondered if Laura might still try to assert control. Instead, the scissors clattered onto the counter. The sound echoed louder than they should have. "Good," the man said quietly. He turned back to Gia, offering his hand, but not pulling her up, only waiting. She hesitated, then placed her hand in his. His grip was steady, warm. He helped her stand, keeping his body angled slightly in front of her. Not blocking her view, but making it clear where his loyalty lay. "We're leaving this room," he said. "Right now." Gia nodded. They moved toward the door together. Laura stepped forward instinctively. "You can't just take her." He stopped, looked at her. "You already took something that wasn't yours," he said. "This ends now." There was no insult in his voice, no drama, just consequence. Gia didn't look back as they walked out. She didn't need to. She felt it, the shift, the balance of power tipping away from the person who had tried to break her. Outside the prep room, whispers stirred. Guests noticed, heads turned, but none of that mattered. What mattered was the way this man walked beside her, not ahead, not behind, matching. Her pace, as if instinctively aware she needed control, returned to her step. Gia finally found her voice. "Why?" she whispered. "Why did you help me?" He glanced down at her. "Because what I saw was wrong," he said simply. That was it. No explanation of status, no announcement of importance. But something in his calm told her this wasn't the end of the moment. It was the beginning of something much larger, and everyone watching could feel it too. They stopped just outside the hallway. The music from the reception drifted back in, soft, cheerful, unaware. Gia stood there wrapped in a stranger's jacket, her pulse still racing, her thoughts tangled between shock and relief. She looked at him properly for the first time. Not just his height, not just the tailored suit, but the way he carried himself, grounded, alert, unrushed, like a man who didn't need permission to intervene when something was wrong. "Are you okay to stand?" he asked. She nodded, even though her legs still felt weak. I think so. He didn't rush her back inside, didn't steer her anywhere yet. He waited. That alone told her something important. Whatever power he had, he wasn't using it to control her. Guests nearby tried not to stare, but curiosity followed them in waves. A woman whispered to her partner. Someone else paused mid-step. Gia felt the familiar urge to shrink again. The man noticed. You don't owe anyone an explanation, he said quietly, leaning in just enough for only her to hear. Not right now. Her throat tightened. Thank you, she murmured. I didn't even know how to. You don't have to, he replied. One step at a time. She took a breath, then another, and in that space, between humiliation and recovery, questions began to rise. Who was he? Why did he walk in at exactly that moment? And how did he know, without asking, that what was happening behind that door wasn't a misunderstanding? Viewers watching this moment would be asking the same thing. Because men like this don't usually appear by accident. This wasn't loud heroics. This was awareness. This was choice. And choices like that always come from somewhere. Gia finally looked up at him again. You didn't hesitate, she said. Most people would have. He studied her face for a brief second before answering. I don't believe in watching harm and calling it privacy, he said. That answer lingered, because it hinted at something deeper, values formed long before this wedding. Somewhere behind them, a voice called Gia's name. Danny. Gia stiffened. Her first instinct was to protect her sister's happiness, even now. He noticed that too. Do you want me to stay with you? He asked. Yes, she said without thinking. The word surprised her, but it was honest. He nodded. Then I'm not going anywhere. And just like that, the hook tightened. Because this story was no longer only about what was taken from Gia. It was about what was about to be revealed. Who this man truly was. What kind of power he held. And why stepping in today would change both of their lives in ways neither expected. And here's where you, watching this, need to lean in. Because this wasn't the end of the humiliation. It was the beginning of the reckoning. So ask yourself, what happens when someone tries to shame you in public, and the wrong person witnesses it? What happens when quiet strength meets cruelty? And what if the man who stepped in wasn't just a guest, but someone capable of restoring far more than what was lost in that room? We're about to find out. If you believe no one should ever be humiliated for who they are, like this video right now, comment, stand up if you think dignity matters, and subscribe, because this story isn't just about survival. It's about what happens when the right person refuses to look away. Before the wedding, before the locked door, before the scissors ever touched her hair, Gia's world was once simple. She grew up in a small southern town where porches mattered, where neighbors spoke in full sentences, and where her parents believed in presence more than perfection. Her mother used to sit her between her knees on Sunday mornings, humming softly while working coconut oil into her curls. Your hair tells a story, her mother would say, and it's a good one. Gia believed her. Her father believed it too. He loved her confidence the most. Not the loud kind, just the way she walked without apology. The way she didn't fold herself smaller to make rooms comfortable. He called her curls her crown. When teachers complimented her writing, he framed the papers. When kids stared too long, he told her, let them look. Gia learned early that identity wasn't something to negotiate. Her home was warm. Her laughter came easily. Her hair was never a problem. Not then. Her mother's illness came quietly. No warning. No dramatic build-up. Just exhaustion that didn't fade, and smiles that started coming slower. Gia was 12 when the house changed. Her mother's laughter left first, then her strength. Then, eventually, her voice. Grief didn't arrive all at once. It arrived in unfinished sentences, in empty chairs, in hair products left untouched on the bathroom counter. After the funeral, Gia stopped sitting between anyone's knees. She learned to do her own hair in silence. Her father tried, God he tried, but grief hollowed him in places Gia didn't yet understand. And for the first time, Gia felt something unfamiliar creeping into her chest. Uncertainty. The world that had once affirmed her now felt thinner. Laura came later, introduced slowly, carefully. She smiled often. She spoke softly. She never raised her voice. That's what made it confusing. At first, her comments sounded harmless. Your hair is very expressive. That color lipstick is bold. You have such presence. Each sentence landed with a pause, as if waiting for Gia to apologize for something she hadn't done. Laura never said wrong. She didn't need to. Correction hid behind courtesy. Gia learned to read tone instead of words. Her father noticed some of it, but not enough, and Gia didn't push. She still believed love required patience. Her father's death was sudden. No goodbye, no warning. One phone call. One silence that never lifted. The house changed overnight. Rules appeared where none had existed. Expectations tightened. Laura no longer asked. She instructed. Gia felt it immediately. The loss of protection. Her father had been a buffer. Without him, the space between politeness and control collapsed. Laura didn't become cruel. She became confident. And confidence without kindness is dangerous. Part 5. Why Gia stayed. Danny. Gia could have left. She was old enough, strong enough. But Danny was still there, her little sister, her anchor. Danny didn't see Gia as too much. She saw her as home. When things grew tense, Danny would slip into Gia's room and lie beside her, whispering jokes, reminding her she wasn't alone. Gia stayed for that, for the quiet promises siblings make without speaking. She stayed because leaving would have meant abandoning the last piece of her mother's legacy, and because she still believed endurance was a form of love. She didn't know yet that endurance has limits. Gia and Danny never needed to prove they belonged to each other. The world did that enough. Growing up, people often assumed they weren't sisters. Sometimes it was the skin tone. Sometimes it was the hair. Sometimes it was the way Danny carried Laura's features while Gia carried memories of a mother no one else could see anymore. "Are you cousins?" strangers would ask. Danny always answered first. "That's my sister." No hesitation, no explanation. Gia noticed how differently the house treated them. Danny was praised for being easy. Gia was advised to be careful. Danny's quiet was seen as grace. Gia's presence was seen as something to manage. Yet in private, the balance shifted. Danny followed Gia everywhere, copied her handwriting, borrowed her clothes, sat on her bed during storms. When Laura's comments grew sharper, Danny noticed before Gia admitted it. "She talks to you like you're a problem," Danny once whispered. Gia shrugged it off. But Danny never did. The engagement happened on an ordinary Tuesday. Danny burst into Gia's room, breathless, eyes shining, holding up her left hand like it was a secret she could barely contain. "He asked," she said. Gia stared for half a second, then screamed. They laughed. They cried. They held each other like they were still little girls hiding from the world together. "I want you with me," Danny said once the excitement settled. "Not just there. With me. Beside me." Gia blinked. "Of course." "No," Danny insisted. "I mean it. Maid of honor, front row, right next to me." Gia felt something warm rise in her chest. Not pride, belonging. Laura's reaction came later, measured, controlled. "Well," she said, eyes flicking briefly to Gia, "this will be a lot of planning." The word "a lot" lingered. Danny didn't notice. Gia did. The decision wasn't dramatic. It came quietly late one night as Gia stood in front of her mirror. She pictured the wedding photos, her sister glowing, guests smiling, and herself, whole or hidden. Danny noticed her hesitation immediately. "Wear your hair out," she said gently. "Please." Gia looked at her. "Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything." So Gia booked the appointment. A black-owned salon. Hands that understood texture. Laughter that felt like relief. When the stylist finished shaping her fro, Gia didn't see defiance. She saw honesty. This wasn't rebellion. It was alignment. Compliments came fast. From aunties, from cousins, from people who hadn't spoken to Gia in years. You look beautiful. That hair suits you. You're glowing. Laura noticed everything. The way conversations paused when Gia entered. The way eyes lingered. The way attention moved without permission. Her smile tightened. "That's very bold," she said quietly. Gia met her gaze. "It's just me." Something darkened behind Laura's eyes. Not anger, but calculation. The wedding hadn't happened yet, but the balance was already shifting, and Laura felt it. The rehearsal dinner took place at a private event hall tucked behind a row of palm-lined streets, the kind of place that smelled like polished wood and fresh flowers the moment you stepped inside. Soft music played, not the kind meant for dancing, just enough to make conversations feel smoother. Danny moved through the room like she belonged to the moment. Her fiancé stayed close, smiling like he couldn't believe his life had turned out this good. People kept raising glasses to toast them, calling them perfect, and Danny kept blushing in that sweet way that made Gia want to laugh. Gia stood near the edge at first, letting the room settle around her. Her afro sat exactly the way the stylist shaped it, rounded, regal, and alive. Tiny gold cuffs caught the light when she moved her head. It was not loud. It was not trying to steal anything. It was simply her. A group of black aunties spotted her almost immediately. "Come here, baby," one called, waving her closer with the authority only aunties have. Gia approached, smiling politely. They looked her up and down like judges at a pageant, then nodded in approval. "Mm-hmm," one said. "Now that is a look." Another touched the air near her hair, not grabbing it, just admiring. "You didn't come to play, did you?" Gia laughed softly. "It's just my hair." "It ain't just hair," the auntie replied, wagging a finger. "It's confidence." More compliments followed. Even guests Gia didn't recognize smiled at her, some with warmth, some with that faint curiosity people wore when they weren't used to seeing black beauty presented with no apology. She didn't mind the curiosity when it was respectful. She minded when it came with a judgmental pause. And there were a few of those too. A white woman near the bar leaned toward her friend and whispered something with a look that was half fascination, half discomfort. Gia had seen that look her whole life. She didn't react. She didn't shrink. She simply turned her attention back to Danny, who was laughing near the center of the room, holding her fiancé's hand like the future was already in her palm. Then Gia felt it. A gaze, not heavy, not invasive, just steady. She turned her head slightly and her eyes met his. He was standing near the far side of the room, close enough to see everything but not close enough to be pulled into it. Tall, broad-shouldered, tailored navy suit that fit like it had been made for him alone. Polished shoes. A watch that looked expensive without screaming for attention. He didn't laugh loudly, didn't gesture wildly. He simply watched. Not in the way men watched when they wanted something. In the way men watched when they noticed the truth of a room. Gia had learned to read people quickly, especially men who had money, or influence, or both. The loud ones tried to impress. The quiet ones usually ran the room. He looked like the second kind. He was holding a glass but hadn't touched it in a while, his attention. Following Danny and her fiancé, scanning faces, reading energy. When his gaze met Gia's again, he didn't flinch or look away like he'd been caught. He gave a small, respectful nod. Not flirtation. Acknowledgement. Like he was saying, "I see you." Gia's pulse tripped once. She looked away first, not out of shyness exactly, more like habit. Men didn't look at her with calm respect often. They either ignored her, or stared too boldly, or came with a line they thought would work. This man did none of that. He simply stayed still, existing in his own control. Danny's fiancée suddenly called out across the room, "Dane, come meet my future-in-laws before they start thinking you're too good for us." The man in the navy suit lifted his glass slightly in response, smiling just enough to show he heard, but he didn't rush over. The smile wasn't playful. It was measured, comfortable. like someone who didn't need to prove he belonged anywhere. Gia kept her eyes on Danny again, but her skin stayed aware of him in the background, like a song you don't realize you're listening to until it stops. Later, Gia stepped outside for air. The hall's lights were beautiful, but too bright after a while, and she needed a moment to breathe without pretending she was fine. The night outside was warm, the kind of evening that carried salt in the air even when you weren't near the ocean. She leaned against the balcony railing, letting the quiet settle her. Footsteps approached behind her. She didn't turn immediately. She didn't want to invite conversation, but the footsteps stopped a polite distance away. A voice spoke, low, calm, careful. "Do you mind if I stand here?" Gia turned. It was him. Up close, he looked even more composed. Clean-shaven jaw, piercing blue eyes that softened at the edges when he wasn't guarding them. A scent that was subtle, clean, expensive, not overpowering. She blinked once, then nodded. "It's a free balcony." He gave the smallest smile. Silence settled between them, not awkward, just unfamiliar, like both of them were deciding what kind of moment this was allowed to become. After a few seconds, he spoke again. "You're the bride's sister." Not a question. A statement. Gia lifted her chin. "Yes, I thought so," he said. "Danny talks about you like you hung the moon." Gia's throat tightened unexpectedly. "She does?" He nodded. "With a lot of love." Gia looked away, staring at the parking lot lights in the distance. "That sounds like her." He waited a beat, then said, "You seem protective of her." Gia's eyes returned to his. "Because she's good. People like her don't deserve chaos." His gaze held hers, steady and honest. "That's true," he said quietly. "And people like you don't deserve to be treated like you're inconvenient." Gia froze, because he said it like he'd noticed something, like he'd seen what others missed. "Excuse me?" she asked, not confrontational, just startled. He didn't backtrack, didn't apologize. He simply replied, "Sometimes a room tells you more than words." Gia felt heat rise into her face, not embarrassment, but something else. Recognition. Then he added softly, "I'm Dane." She hesitated for half a second before answering. "Gia." "Nice to meet you, Gia," he said, and the way he said her name sounded like respect, not performance. When they went back inside, Gia watched him differently, not with infatuation, with awareness. He moved through the room like he knew how to be present without dominating space. People greeted him with familiarity, but also something close to deference. A man near the bar leaned in to shake his hand. "Dane." "Been a minute." Dane nodded. "Good to see you." No bragging, no loud stories, just calm. A woman approached next, dressed in something expensive, voice light. "You made it." "We weren't sure you would." "I said I'd be here," Dane replied. That was it. And yet, the woman smiled like she'd just been granted a favor. He was the kind of person people adjusted around, not because he demanded it, because they instinctively did. Gia noticed his discipline in small things. He didn't drink more than he needed. He didn't flirt around the room. He didn't lean into attention. He checked on Danny's fiancée briefly, clasping his shoulder once, saying something low. That made the groom relax a little, like Dane had just reminded him he could breathe. It looked like friendship, but it also looked like leadership. No one announced who he was. No one had to. The room treated him like an unspoken center. And still, when Dane's eyes moved to Gia again, they didn't carry ownership. They carried curiosity, like he was still figuring her out, and not in a superficial way, in a way that made her feel both safe and unsettled. Laura had been watching too. Gia realized it when she turned and saw her stepmother's face tighten at the exact moment Dane walked past them. Laura's eyes flicked from Dane to Gia, then back again. The smile she wore didn't reach her eyes. "Who is that?" Laura asked Danny's fiancée's mother, voice sweet. The older woman chuckled lightly. "That's Dane Whitlock. He and the groom grew up together." Laura's eyebrows lifted, just slightly. "Whitlock?" The older woman nodded, oblivious. "Yes, very successful, very respected." Laura's gaze sharpened. Gia felt it, like a cold draft that didn't belong in a warm room. Laura turned toward Gia, her smile returning in a controlled shape. "He's been looking at you," she said softly. Gia's stomach tightened. "That's a strange thing to say," Gia replied, keeping her tone calm. Laura's smile held. "I'm just observing," she said. "You know how these things can be interpreted." Gia met her eyes. Interpreted by who? Laura's gaze didn't flicker this time. "By people who don't want distractions," she said. There it was, not direct cruelty. A warning dressed as etiquette. Gia didn't respond. She didn't need to, because Danny rushed over in that moment, glowing, excited, wrapping her arms around Gia. "You good?" Danny whispered. Gia forced a smile. "I'm good," but Laura's eyes stayed fixed on Dane across the room. Not with admiration, with suspicion, as if his interest wasn't a compliment, as if it was a threat to the order she'd worked so hard to control. And Gia felt it deep in her chest. This wedding wasn't only a celebration, it was a stage, and Laura was starting to panic because, for the first time in a long time, Gia wasn't fading into the background. The wedding morning arrived wrapped in softness. Sunlight poured through tall windows, warming the pale walls of the bridal suite. The air smelled like fresh florals and perfume layered gently, nothing overpowering. Laughter floated in from different corners of the room, bridesmaids adjusting dresses, stylists finishing makeup, relatives greeting one another with excited embraces. Danny sat near the center, glowing in a way that felt effortless. Her dress fell perfectly against her frame, her hands trembling slightly as she laughed at something her maid of honor said. Gia stood nearby, watching her sister with quiet pride. This was the day Danny had dreamed of. This was joy made visible. When Danny's eyes met Gia's, she smiled wide and reached out her hand. "Come here," Danny said. "Look at us." They stood together in front of the mirror, sisters side by side. Gia's afro framed her face beautifully, shaped with care, adorned with small gold cuffs that caught the light when she moved. Her dress fit her like it had been waiting for her all along. "You look perfect," Danny whispered. Gia swallowed. "So do you." For a moment, everything felt right. The past, the tension, the quiet warnings, all of it faded beneath the warmth of shared love. Outside, music began to play softly as guests arrived. The ceremony would start soon. None of them knew what waited just beyond the warmth of that room. Laura approached slowly. Her heels made no sound against the carpet, but Gia felt her presence before she spoke. "That hair," Laura said lightly, eyes fixed on Gia's reflection. "It's fuller than I expected." Gia kept her tone even. "It's how I always wear it." Laura smiled, thin and controlled. "Today isn't an always kind of day. It's a wedding." Danny frowned. "Mom, I'm just thinking about balance," Laura interrupted gently. "The bride should stand out." Gia met her gaze in the mirror. "I'm not competing with Danny," she said. "I'm standing beside her." Laura's smile didn't move. "Perception matters," she replied. "Guests don't always understand intention." Gia felt the familiar pressure, the suggestion that her presence needed explanation. Danny squeezed Gia's hand. "I asked her to wear her hair like this." Laura's eyes flicked to Danny, then back. "We can talk about it later," Laura said. "Privately." The word privately lingered. Gia nodded once, choosing peace for her sister's sake. But something in Laura's posture had shifted. The wedding had begun to feel less like a celebration, and more like a stage Laura needed to control. It happened during the reception. The ceremony itself passed beautifully. Vows exchanged, tears shed, applause, ringing out as Danny and her husband walked back down the aisle hand in hand. Gia clapped with everyone else, smiling through emotion that felt real and earned. At the reception hall, laughter returned. Music played. Glasses were raised. Then Laura touched Gia's arm. "There's something wrong with your hair," she whispered. "We need to fix it before the photos." Gia frowned. "It's fine." "No," Laura insisted. "Come with me." Quickly, Gia hesitated, but she didn't want tension, didn't want questions. didn't want to cast a shadow over Danny's joy, so she followed. They entered a small prep room off the hallway. Laura closed the door behind them. The lock clicked. Gia turned sharply. "Why did you lock it?" Laura's face changed. The polite smile disappeared. "You don't listen," Laura said. "And now you've embarrassed me." Gia stepped back. "What are you talking about?" "You knew what you were doing," Laura continued, drawing eyes, standing out. "That wasn't my intention," Gia said. "I was just—" "Exactly," Laura snapped. "You never think about how things look." Fear crept up Gia's spine. "This isn't appropriate," she said. "Open the door." Laura didn't move. Instead, she reached into a drawer and pulled out scissors. "Laura," Gia whispered, "put those down. You won't learn any other way," Laura replied. Before Gia could react, the scissors lifted. Snip, a lock of hair fell. Gia gasped, hands flying to her head. "Stop!" she cried. Snip, another curl hit the floor. "I told you to tone it down," Laura said, voice shaking, not with fear, but with something closer to satisfaction. "This is my sister's wedding," Gia sobbed. "Please." Snip, snip, more hair fell. Gia backed into the counter, legs weak, chest tightening as panic took over. The sound of the scissors felt louder than the music outside. Laura's eyes were wild now. "You always think you're special." Gia slid down, knees buckling. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't scream. The humiliation wasn't just physical. It was intentional, calculated, meant to reduce her to something small. Gia pressed her hands to her mouth, shaking. Her reflection stared back at her in fragments. Uneven hair, smeared makeup, eyes wide with disbelief. The room felt smaller by the second. She tried to stand. Her legs failed. She felt stripped, not just of hair, but of dignity, of safety, of control over her own body. Outside, the celebration continued. Inside, Gia broke. Her chest tightened until every breath burned. Tears came without sound. She didn't know how long she stayed there. Seconds or minutes blurred together. All she knew was this: something precious had been taken from her, and she didn't yet know that someone had already noticed her absence. That footsteps were approaching the door, that the balance of power was about to shift. The music outside was loud enough to hide a lot. That was the cruel part. A celebration could swallow pain without anyone noticing, especially when the pain was trapped behind a closed door. Gia's throat burned. Her chest tightened with every breath. She was crouched near the cabinet, hair scattered across the tile like something she couldn't gather fast enough. Her hands trembled as she tried to hold what was left of her curls in place, as if gripping tighter could undo what had already happened. Laura stood over her like the room belonged to her. "Get up," Laura said, voice clipped. "You're not about to make a scene." Gia tried to speak. Her voice came out thin. "Please." "Stop." Laura's eyes narrowed. "I told you what would happen if you refused to listen." The scissors lifted again. Gia flinched so hard her shoulder hit the cabinet. The door handle turned. Laura froze. Gia's heart skipped, hope rising too fast, too fragile. The handle rattled again, stronger this time. Laura snapped toward the door. "Who is it?" A man's voice came through, low, calm, and firm enough to quiet the room even from the other side. "Open the door." Laura's lips pressed into a tight line. "We're busy." The voice didn't change. "Open the door." Gia didn't recognize the voice at first. Her mind was too fogged by panic, too full of shame. She only felt the shift in the air, the sudden sense that someone with real control had arrived. Laura moved quickly, sliding the scissors toward the counter as if she could hide what she'd done. The handle turned again. The door opened. Dane Whitlock stood there. For a second, the world narrowed to that doorway, his tall frame in a navy suit, posture steady, eyes moving fast. They went to the floor first, then to Gia, then to Laura. And something changed in his face, not a dramatic expression, not a show. just a quiet tightening around his eyes that said he had understood the situation instantly. "What," Dane said softly, "is going on in here?" Laura recovered quickly, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, Dane, she's fine. We're just fixing something before photos." Dane didn't respond to the smile. He stepped into the room with measured calm, like he refused to let chaos dictate his movements. His gaze stayed on Laura. "Step away from her." Laura blinked. "Excuse me?" Dane's voice remained even. No shouting, no shaking. "Step away from her." Gia couldn't stop trembling. She kept her eyes down, ashamed of the tears, ashamed of the mess, ashamed of the way. She looked like she'd been broken in private, while everyone else danced outside. But Dane didn't look at her with pity. He looked at her like she was a person who deserved safety. Laura forced a laugh. "You're misunderstanding." Dane's eyes didn't flicker. "No," he said. "I'm not." Laura's smile sharpened, as if she realized she needed to control the story quickly. "She asked me to help," Laura said. She was worried she looked too much, and I told her we could tone it down. Gia's head lifted fast. "That's not true," she tried to say, but her voice cracked. Her throat felt like it had been squeezed for too long. Laura immediately turned toward her, eyes warning. "Gia, don't do this. Not today." Dane noticed the warning. He watched Laura like he was reading a language she thought only family understood. "You locked this door," he said. Laura's smile slipped. "I didn't." Dane glanced at the lock, then back at her. "It's locked from the inside. So either you locked it or she did." Laura scoffed. She panicked. She gets emotional. Gia shook her head, tears spilling again. "I didn't lock it." Laura's tone sweetened, like honey covering something bitter. "Gia, I'm trying to help you. You're the maid of honor. People are watching." Dane took one slow step closer to Laura, not aggressive, just unavoidable. "You were holding scissors," he said, voice still calm. Laura's eyes darted to the counter. "I was trimming," she insisted. "A little." "She asked me." Gia's breath hitched. That lie wasn't just about hair. It was about erasing her voice in real time. Dane turned his head slightly, speaking to Gia now, but gently, like he understood she was shaken. "Did you ask her to cut your hair?" Gia opened her mouth. Her lips trembled. No," she whispered. "No." Laura's face tightened. "Gia." Dane's voice cut through, low but final. "Do not speak to her like that." Silence. Laura stared at him, as if she couldn't believe someone had challenged her in her own private room. "This is family," she snapped, dropping the sweet tone. "You don't know anything about our dynamic." Dane nodded once, as if acknowledging the word family, then calmly dismantling it. "I know what I saw," he said. "I know what's on that floor. And I know she's terrified." Laura's nostrils flared. "Terrified? Please. She's dramatic. She likes attention." Gia flinched at the words, because she'd heard them before, in softer versions, dressed as advice. Dane looked at Laura like she'd exposed something ugly. Then he said quietly, "Your problem is that you think attention is something she's stealing, when it's simply something she's receiving." Laura's jaw clenched. She stepped back, but only because she realized she wasn't in control of the room anymore. Dane turned fully toward Gia. His expression softened, not in pity, but in steady care. He crouched slightly, so he wasn't towering over her. "Hey," he said, voice low. "Look at me." Gia's eyes lifted slowly. Tears clung to her lashes. Her chest still hurt. Dane's gaze held hers without judgment. "You're not in trouble," he said. "You didn't do anything wrong." That sentence hit her harder than anything else, because shame always made her feel guilty for existing. Dane took off his suit jacket. He moved slowly, no sudden motions, then draped it around her shoulders like a shield. Not because she was cold, because she was exposed, and he understood that. Laura scoffed again. "Oh my God." Dane didn't even look at her this time. His body shifted slightly, placing himself between Laura and Gia without making a show of it. A quiet wall. A boundary made flesh. Gia clutched the jacket, breathing it in without meaning to. Clean, expensive, calm. Like the opposite of the room she'd been trapped in. "Can you stand?" Dane asked softly. Gia nodded, but her legs felt weak. Dane offered his hand, not pulling, not rushing, just offering. Gia placed her hand in his. His grip was steady, warm, respectful. He helped her stand slowly, keeping his movements controlled, as if he didn't want to startle her nervous system any more than it already was. Laura lifted her chin. "This is ridiculous. She'll ruin the wedding if you keep encouraging this." Dane's voice was quiet, but dangerous in its certainty. "She's not ruining anything," he said. "You are." Laura's face flickered, rage, then restraint. "You don't know her," Laura snapped. Dane didn't raise his voice. "I know what dignity looks like," he replied. "And I know what you just did, isn't it?" Gia's throat tightened again. She hadn't heard anyone defend her that directly since her father. Dane leaned closer to Gia, voice gentle again. "I'm taking you out of this room," he said. "You're not staying in here with her. Understand?" Gia nodded, a shaky exhale leaving her lips. "Yes." "Good," Dane said, like he was giving her control back one word at a time. Dane guided Gia toward the door. Laura moved quickly, trying to block their path. "You can't just walk her out like this," she said. "People will ask questions." Dane stopped. He looked at Laura for a long second. Then he spoke in the same calm tone, but colder now. "Move." Laura's eyes widened. "Excuse me." Dane didn't repeat himself louder. He repeated himself clearer. "Move." The simplicity of it made Laura hesitate, because this wasn't a family argument anymore. This was someone with real authority refusing to negotiate with cruelty. Laura stepped aside, but her voice sharpened as she did. "If Danny finds out you caused drama..." Dane's gaze flicked, sharp as a blade. "You don't get to use Danny as a shield," he said. "Not after what you've done." Gia's breath hitched at the mention of Danny, her sister, the joy outside, the wedding she didn't want to stain. Dane noticed Gia's panic. He placed a hand lightly at the center of her back. Support, not possession. "We're not making a scene," he said quietly to Gia. "We're making you safe." They exited into the hallway. Music and laughter drifted in again. The contrast was cruel. Gia felt exposed the second she stepped out. Her eyes darted to anyone watching. Two guests were walking past. One paused, confusion flickering. Dane's body angled subtly again, shielding her from their line of sight without making her feel hidden. He guided her down the hall toward a quieter side corridor. Gia whispered, barely audible, "Danny, she can't see me like this." Dane nodded once. "Then she won't," he said. "Not until you're ready." He glanced at his phone, tapping quickly. Not texting casually, calling. His voice stayed low, professional, controlled. "I need a stylist. Immediately," he said. "At this venue. Yes, right now." A pause. Double rate. Another pause. Triple. "I'm not negotiating. Get here." He ended the call and looked at Gia. "You're not going back in there until you feel like yourself again," he said. Gia blinked, tears slipping again. "You don't have to do this." Dane's voice softened. "I know I don't have to," he said. "I'm choosing to." That word, choosing, felt like a hand reaching into a dark place. They reached a small side lounge, quiet, dimmer, away from the crowd. Dane closed the door behind them but did not lock it. That detail mattered. Gia noticed immediately. Locked doors had become terror. Unlocked doors became permission to breathe. Dane pulled a chair out for her. "Sit," he said gently. Gia sat, still trembling, jacket wrapped tightly around her shoulders. Her eyes went to her hands. Hair strands clung to her fingers. She swallowed hard. "I didn't do anything," she whispered, voice breaking. "I didn't do anything wrong." Dane sat across from her, not too close, giving her space. "I know," he said again. "And I need you to believe that." Gia shook her head, shame flooding her. "I've been told my whole life that I'm too much, too visible. Like I should make myself smaller so people don't get uncomfortable. Dane's jaw tightened, not at her, but at the world that had taught her that. "You are not too much," he said. They were too threatened. Gia looked up slowly. His eyes were steady. No flirting, no performance, just truth. Gia's throat tightened. "I didn't want to ruin Danny's day," she said. "That's why I followed her. That's why I kept quiet." Dane nodded. "I understand," he said. "But protecting your sister doesn't mean sacrificing yourself." The words landed clean, not like advice, like permission. Gia's breathing slowed. For the first time since the scissors touched her hair, her body stopped bracing for the next hit. Dane leaned forward slightly. "Listen to me," he said. "You are not invisible. Not to me. Not today." Gia blinked. A tear fell. Then another. But this time, the tears weren't only pain. They were relief, because someone had seen her and stepped in, not because she begged, not because she performed, but because she deserved it. Dane's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. "They're on their way," he said. Gia swallowed. "Why are you doing this?" she asked again, softer now. Dane paused, then answered with quiet honesty. "Because someone tried to take something from you," he said, "and I won't allow that to be the last word." Gia held his gaze. In that room, for the first time in years, she didn't feel tolerated. She felt chosen. The side lounge remained quiet, insulated from the celebration only a hallway away. Gia sat with her hands folded tightly in her lap, Dane's jacket still wrapped around her shoulders. The initial shock had eased, but a deep exhaustion settled in its place, the kind that followed fear once it realized it had survived. Dane stood near the window, phone pressed to his ear. "Yes," he said calmly. "I need discretion. She's been through enough already." A pause. "Thank you. I'll handle the rest." He ended the call and turned back to Gia. "They're 10 minutes out," he said. "You'll have time." Gia nodded, still processing the weight of everything. Before she could ask anything else, voices drifted in from the hallway. Two men passed by the lounge, one speaking in a hushed tone. "That's Whitlock," one murmured. "Didn't know he was here tonight." The other replied quickly, "He wouldn't miss this. His family practically built half this city." Gia's head lifted. Dane noticed. She met his eyes. "They were talking about you." He gave a small, knowing nod. "I figured." Gia hesitated. "They said your family has been around a long time," Dane finished. "Yes." He didn't say it with pride. He said it like a fact he'd learned to carry carefully. Gia shifted in her seat. "And you?" Dane leaned back against the wall, folding his arms loosely. "I built my company myself. Software, security systems. We went public a few years ago." Gia blinked. The words landed slowly. A billionaire, standing in front of her, not announcing it, not using it, not asking for gratitude, just explaining. "I don't usually bring that part of my life into rooms like this," he continued. "But you deserve to know who intervened." Gia let out a quiet breath. "So when you told her to move," "I meant it," Dane said simply. Gia studied him differently now, not dazzled, aware. She'd seen wealthy men before, men who wore power like armor, who used money to dominate conversations and people. Dane wasn't like that. His authority hadn't come from his name. It came from his restraint. "You didn't have to step in," Gia said softly. "Someone like you. Most people would have just looked away." Dane's jaw tightened slightly. Not defensive, just thoughtful. "I've spent my life around people who mistake silence for class," he said. "I don't." He paused, then added, "Wealth doesn't excuse harm. It exposes what people are willing to tolerate." Gia absorbed that. "You weren't raised like this," she said carefully. Dane shook his head. "I was raised with resources, not always with decency. I learned that part on my own." He met her gaze. "And I refuse to be the kind of man who benefits from power and pretends not to see when it's abused." Gia felt something shift inside her. This wasn't rescue. This was alignment. The difference mattered. A knock came at the door. Dane crossed the room and opened it. A black woman stood there, carrying a professional kit, her eyes sharp and kind at the same time. "I'm Maya," she said. "I came as fast as I could." Dane stepped aside. "Thank you." Maya's eyes went immediately to Gia. "Oh, sweetheart," she said gently. "Come here." Gia stood slowly. Dane didn't hover, didn't direct. He simply stepped back, giving space. Maya assessed the damage quickly, hands light, respectful. "Someone did this without consent," she said quietly. Gia nodded, throat tight. Maya looked at Dane once. "This will take skill, but it can be shaped." "Take whatever time you need," Dane replied. "No pressure." Maya smiled. "I appreciate." Gia noticed something important then. Dane never rushed the process. He never asked how fast it could be done, only how well. Gia sat in front of the mirror again, but this time, the room felt different. Maya worked carefully, trimming where needed, shaping intentionally. Her touch was confident but gentle, like she understood that hair wasn't just hair. It was trust. "You're going to look powerful," Maya murmured. "Not despite what happened, because you survived it." Gia closed her eyes as the work continued. Dane sat across the room, reading emails quietly, not watching, not hovering. Respect in action. When Maya finally stepped back, she smiled wide. "All right," she said. "Take a look." Gia opened her eyes. Her hair was different. Shorter, tapered, intentional. It framed her face in a way that felt new, but not wrong. She didn't see loss anymore. She saw resilience. Her reflection looked back at her, steady, composed, alive. Dane stood slowly. "You look incredible," he said. Not admiration, recognition. Gia stared at her reflection for a long moment. Then she touched her hair gently, not in fear, not in shame, in acceptance. "I don't look like I did this morning," she said quietly. "No," Dane agreed. "You look like someone who refused to disappear." She turned toward him. Tears filled her eyes again, but this time they didn't burn. "They tried to make me smaller," she whispered. Dane met her gaze. "And failed." Gia breathed deeply. For the first time that day she felt whole again, not because everything was fixed, but because something inside her had shifted. She wasn't broken. She had been tested, and she had been met with decency when she needed it most. Dane glanced at his phone. "The reception's still going," he said, "but you decide what happens next." That mattered more than he knew. Gia straightened her shoulders. She didn't feel tolerated. She didn't feel managed. She felt seen. Gia paused just outside the reception doors, her hand hovering near the handle. Inside, the music rose and fell in gentle waves. Laughter drifted through the thick wood, warm and alive. Glasses clinked. Someone cheered. Danny's wedding was still in full bloom. The world hadn't cracked open the way Gia's chest had earlier, and somehow that mattered. Dane stood beside her, not touching her, not guiding her forward. Just present, steady, available if she needed him, invisible if she didn't. "You don't have to go back in," he said quietly. "And if you do, you don't owe anyone an explanation." Gia inhaled slowly. "I want to," she replied, "but not the way I left." She rolled her shoulders once, feeling the weight of the moment settle into her bones. Her hair felt different against her neck, lighter, intentional, not ruined, changed. She opened the door. The reception hall came back into view all at once. Warm lights strung across the ceiling. Tables filled with guests leaning into conversation. Danny and her husband near the center, laughing with friends. A few heads turned, then more. Not sharply, not cruelly, just noticing. Gia felt the attention without letting it swallow her. She stepped forward at an even pace, Dane walking beside her, not leading, not trailing. A quiet alignment. Whispers brushed the edges of the room. "Is that her? Her hair looks different. Who's the man with her?" Gia didn't answer any of it. She lifted her chin slightly and continued forward. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't measuring herself against the room. She wasn't checking her posture or rehearsing a smile to make others comfortable. She simply was, and that changed how the room received her. Someone smiled at her genuinely. Another nodded politely. A woman near the bar murmured, "She looks confident." Gia didn't flinch. She didn't apologize with her body. She moved through the space like someone who belonged there because she had always belonged there. Danny saw her. Gia recognized the moment instantly. The split second where Danny's smile shifted, not from judgment, but from instinct. Her sister crossed the room quickly, weaving past guests, lifting the hem of her dress just enough to move faster. "Gia," Danny whispered, pulling her into a careful hug. "What happened?" Gia wrapped her arms around her sister, breathing in the familiar scent of her perfume, vanilla and something floral. "Comfort. I'm okay," Gia said softly. Danny pulled back, her eyes scanning Gia's face, then her hair. Her expression flickered, concern, confusion, restraint. "Your hair," Danny said quietly. "Did someone—" Gia shook her head gently. "Not tonight." Danny hesitated. Gia placed her hands over Danny's. "This is your day. You deserve to have it without weight." Silence stretched between them for a moment. Then Danny nodded, her eyes shining. "Okay. But later." "I mean it," Gia smiled. Later, Danny squeezed her hands once more, grounding, grateful. "I'm glad you came back," Danny said. "I feel better knowing you're here." Gia watched her sister walk back to her husband, laughter rising again as someone cracked a joke. The joy returned to Danny's face like sunlight. Gia felt the ache in her chest soften. She hadn't denied herself. She had chosen timing, chosen love over spectacle, chosen her sister's happiness over immediate release. And for the first time, that choice didn't feel like sacrifice. It felt like strength. As the reception settled back into its rhythm, something subtle but undeniable shifted. Gia noticed it first not because she was looking for it, but because it was missing. Laura. At a wedding like this, the bride's mother should have been everywhere, greeting guests, adjusting centerpieces, hovering near the photographer, claiming space with purpose. But Laura was nowhere. Gia stood near the edge of the dance floor, sipping water Danny had pressed into her hand. Her eyes moved instinctively through the room, mapping familiar faces. Table by table. Bar area. Near the DJ booth. Nothing. At first, Gia assumed Laura was busy, or sulking, or waiting for a private moment to reclaim control. Then she heard it. A quiet exchange near the dessert table. "Has anyone seen her? I thought she went to check on the bride. She hasn't been back." The questions floated lightly, but they stacked. Gia felt something unexpected rise in her chest. Relief, not triumph, not victory, just relief. Because for once, Laura's silence wasn't directed at her. It was directed inward. Dane noticed Gia's attention drift. "She left," he said quietly, stepping just close enough to be heard. Gia looked at him. "Left the room?" "Left the building," Dane replied. She didn't want to answer questions she couldn't manage. Gia absorbed that slowly. "So she chose disappearance," Gia murmured. Dane nodded. "People who rely on control don't do well when they lose the audience." Gia didn't respond right away. She thought about the years she'd spent adjusting herself, voice lowered, shoulders rounded, presence reduced, just to avoid this exact discomfort. And now the discomfort wasn't hers. She didn't feel smug. She felt free. The absence wasn't loud, but it spoke. The music shifted again. Slower this time. The lights dimmed just enough to soften faces and quiet conversations. Couples instinctively moved closer together, the room adjusting its energy without announcement. Dane turned to Gia. He didn't reach for her immediately. "Would you like to dance?" he asked. Not, "Can I have this dance?" Not, "You should dance to relax." A choice. Gia studied him for a moment, not assessing charm, assessing intention. "Yes," she said. He offered his hand. She took it. They stepped onto the floor together, moving with the rhythm naturally, without urgency. His hand rested at her waist, open, steady, respectful. Her hand settled against his shoulder, light but grounded. They didn't cling, they didn't rush. They simply moved. Gia rested her cheek briefly against his shoulder, surprised by how calm it felt. Not dizzy, not overwhelming, just safe. You didn't disappear, Dane said quietly, almost to himself. Gia smiled faintly. Neither did you. They swayed in silence for a moment, bodies aligned but not pressed together. The music carried them without demanding anything. I don't want this to feel like you rescued me, Gia said softly. Dane's response was immediate. It isn't, he said. You stood back up on your own. I just made sure no one kept you down. Her breath caught. That mattered. He hadn't rewritten her story. He'd protected her agency. Around them, laughter and conversation continued. But the dance felt insulated from it, all. Like a small agreement between two people to move honestly in a dishonest moment. When the song ended, they didn't step away quickly. They didn't linger too long either. Balance. They walked off the floor together, not holding hands now, but close. Enough that the connection didn't vanish the moment the music stopped. Gia leaned against a high table near the edge of the room, exhaling slowly. I don't know what happens next, she admitted. Dane nodded. That's fair. She looked at him. I don't want expectations tied to what you did tonight. He met her gaze steadily. I wouldn't do that to you, he said. What happened tonight stands on its own. A pause. Then he added, but I'd like to know you. Without pressure, without this moment hanging over us. Gia considered that. No urgency, no claim, no assumptions. I'd like that too, she said. Across the room, Danny laughed loudly, throwing her head back as her husband whispered something in her ear. The joy was effortless now, unburdened. Gia watched her for a moment. Then she turned back to Dane, shoulders relaxed, eyes clear. This wasn't romance born from chaos. This was curiosity built on respect. And that felt like the right beginning. The reception began to thin out as the night stretched on. Shoes came off beneath tables. Jackets were draped over chairs. Laughter softened from celebration into comfort. Gia stood near the exit doors, watching guests say their goodbyes, hugging Danny, congratulating her again, promising to call soon. She felt calm, not numb. Calm. The difference mattered. Dane stood beside her, hands in his pockets, posture relaxed. He wasn't scanning the room. He wasn't guarding her. He was simply there. You know, Gia said quietly, eyes still on the room, I used to think shame worked because I deserved it. Dane turned toward her, attentive. I thought if someone tried to make me feel small, it meant I'd done something wrong, she continued. Like my presence was the problem. She paused, choosing her words carefully. But tonight showed me something. Dane waited. She turned to face him fully. People who try to shame you, she said slowly, deliberately, are afraid of your light. The words didn't feel rehearsed. They felt discovered. Dane nodded once. Exactly. Gia exhaled, as if releasing a weight she'd carried for years. Laura wasn't protecting the wedding, Gia added. She was protecting her sense of control. And when control fails, Dane said, shame is usually the weapon. Gia let that settle. This wasn't a victory speech. It was clarity, and clarity felt like healing. They stepped outside together into the cool night air. The venue's lights glowed softly behind them, warm against the dark sky. Crickets hummed faintly. Somewhere in the distance, a car door closed. Gia wrapped her arms loosely around herself, not cold, just grounding. You know what the difference was tonight, she said. Dane looked at her. Tell me. One person tried to destroy something about me, Gia said. Another tried to protect it. Dane didn't respond right away. That difference, Gia continued, changes everything. She thought about the scissors, the locked door, the fear that made her chest seize. Then she thought about the jacket, the unlocked room, the steady voice that told her she wasn't wrong for existing. Destruction is loud, she said, It rushes. It doesn't ask. And protection? Dane asked. Gia smiled faintly. Protection listens. It waits. It doesn't take. Dane nodded, his expression thoughtful. That's how it should be. Gia felt something settle inside her, like a lesson finally landing where it belonged. This story wasn't about being saved. It was about being met. They crossed the quiet parking area together. The music from the venue faded behind them, replaced by the soft hum of distant traffic and the crunch of gravel beneath their steps. The night air felt cool and steady, like it was offering space to breathe. Dane walked beside Gia, not ahead of her. He didn't rush. He didn't crowd her. Just presence. Gia reached her car and paused, hand resting on the door handle. For a moment, she simply stood there, grounding herself in the fact that the night had reached a clean edge. "Thank you," she said, not hurried, not obligatory. "For what?" Dane asked. "For walking me out," she replied. "For not assuming." Dane nodded. "I never want safety to feel like ownership." That landed softly and stayed. Gia looked at him, truly looked at him, the parking lights catching the lines of his face. Calm, unperformative, intentional. "I'm okay," she said. "You can head back." He didn't argue. He didn't insist. "Good," he said. "I wanted to hear you say that." He took a step back, giving her space before she even asked for it. That, more than anything, felt like care. Gia opened the car door, then paused again. "Dane?" He turned. "I'm not ready to rush into anything," she said honestly. "Tonight mattered. But I need time to let it land." Dane's expression didn't change. No disappointment, no pressure masked as patience. "I agree," he said. "Rushing would cheapen what actually happened." She smiled faintly. "Still, I don't want this to disappear." "It won't," Dane replied. "Not unless you want it to." A quiet beat passed between them. Then Dane added, "If you ever want to talk, coffee, a walk, no expectations, I'm here." Gia nodded. "I'd like that." "When I choose." "Exactly," Dane said. They shared a look, not a promise, not a dramatic ending, just intention. Gia slid into the driver's seat. Before closing the door, she met his eyes once more. "Good night, Dane." "Good night, Gia." She closed the door and started the engine. As she pulled away, she glanced in the mirror. Dane stood where she'd left him, hands in his pockets, respectful distance intact, no claiming, no taking, just a beginning built the right way. Gia drove home with the windows cracked, letting the cool air wash over her face. The night replayed in her mind, not the cruelty but the clarity that followed it. She hadn't been humiliated into silence. She had been met with dignity, and that changed everything. If there was one truth she carried forward, it was this. People who try to shame you are afraid of your light. They don't want you smaller because you're wrong. They want you smaller because you're powerful without permission. And the right people, they don't cut you down. They stand with you, without possession, without pressure, without fear. If you believe dignity matters, comment worthy. Subscribe for stories that heal, not humiliate. Because everyone deserves to be chosen without being broken first.